All right, so we might get started, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the third session of the self-care series. So my name is Taylor. I'm the student enrichment officer here at MGSE. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands in which we all live and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you all for coming along and welcome back to those who have been to previous sessions. If you have missed any of the other sessions, they are available to watch at the MGSE YouTube channel. MGSE YouTube channel. This session will also be recorded and available to watch there as well. So today's session will be discussing thriving despite struggle, which I think is very relevant at this time of the year and this, I guess, phase of the pandemic. And our wonderful guest speaker and presenter is Dr. Peggy Kern. So before I hand over to Peggy, I will just kindly ask everyone to mute their microphones throughout the presentation. If you have a question, type this in the chat function. I'll be monitoring this and we'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end of the session. It should run for no more than 45 minutes. And this session is designed to be informative, but also be interactive. So we definitely encourage participation. It is optional and we'll prompt you when we get to those interactive stages of the session. So I'll hand over to Peggy now. So Dr. Peggy Kern is an associate professor at the Centre of Positive Psychology at MGSE. So Peggy's research examines questions around who thrives in life and why, including understanding and measuring healthy functioning, identifying individual and social factors impacting life trajectory, and system-informed approaches to wellbeing. So you can find out more about Peggy on her website. I'll add that into the chat function. But Peggy, welcome, thank you, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Taylor. And it's a real pleasure to be joining you wherever you're joining from today. And I am excited to share some of this information. Like Taylor said, if you do have questions, comments along the way, please contribute. I also have a part where I'll ask you to contribute as well. That's totally invitational, and then would love to have discussion at the end with all of this. So focusing here on how we can actually thrive despite struggle. And I think that certainly becomes even more important as we've been navigating this time together. And so a lot of this comes from work that I've been doing with my colleague, Dr. Michelle McQuaid, and the Wellbeing Lab. And so this comes from different work we've been doing there and what we've really been learning over the years. So a lot of this is coming from looking at well-being in the workplace. And at the end, there's a report that I can pass along if you're interested to read more on some of the work that's coming out of that. So to begin with, we can start to say, what do we actually mean by well-being? And there's different definitions of well-being depending on the area that you come from. Coming from a positive psychology perspective, we like to think about well-being as not just the lack of struggle or kind of the lack of ill-being, but also what it means to kind of really thrive in life. I really like a definition by Professor Felicia Huppert and Thomas So. And they talk about well-being in terms of feeling and functioning well across a number of dimensions. And so I like that element of there's how I'm actually feeling, but then also how well I'm functioning as well. And we really need both of these along the way. If we're feeling really bad for a long period of time, it can start to impact upon our functioning. And if we're not functioning well, but we're feeling great, then perhaps we're not actually being very productive in the work that we perhaps need to do. And we can think about different domains in which we might be going well. And there's a lot of different models and frameworks we could use for this. A lot of my work has used the PERMA framework. So this comes from work by Professor Seligman in the US. And so he defines well-being in terms of 5 different pillars: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. I like to include the H for health because our physical health is a part of that as well. And so these are just some areas where we might think about, how am I actually functioning? And we can think about these as almost indicators of how I'm going in different ways. How have my emotions been? How have my relationships been? What might be impacting upon that over time? And if you want to kind of see how you're going in different areas, there's a survey that you can take at your own leisure. So it allows you to take a little survey, get some results, see your report, and gives you some ideas of how you can be supporting those different areas. And it's kind of fascinating to think, even taking these dimensions, for instance. I think as we've gone through this year, my accomplishment has actually been doing pretty well as I've had time working at home. But I think things, especially like relationships, have certainly been challenged as we've navigated the pandemic. And so we can think about well-being in terms of how we're going in different areas. And yet we also have the challenge of what happens in times of struggle. We can think about this year alone, which in many ways, what has happened in 2020 has accentuated a lot of the patterns, has accentuated and accelerated a lot of the patterns that were already going on. I just think back, we started the year and we had the bushfires, and that was we thought that was the big issue of the year. The coronavirus, and now ongoing lockdown restrictions, various things happening around the world. It really has been a year like no other. And over time, this can really weigh on us. And we are seeing a growing number of people who are reporting more mental health issues, challenge, struggle to get through all of that. I think about yourself. Right now, how are you going? Do you feel like you're really thriving and enjoying life? Are you not feeling terrible, but just kind of getting by? Are you struggling, but living well regardless? Or are you really struggling? You think about where you're at, and we might be in these different states at sort of different periods of time, depending on what's going on. This is a question that we've been asking workers, both here in Australia and in the US as well. And we ask people to place themselves, right now, where are you going in things based on everything that's going on in your life? And with this, it actually has helped us kind of rethink a bit about what we mean by well-being and what it means to actually thrive despite struggle that might be going on, which when we look at the events of this year and the flow-on effects of that we're going to have in the future, it becomes more important than ever. And so one thing that has come from this is helping us to rethink our way of thinking about well-being in some ways. So oftentimes we think about well-being in terms of a dimension. So going from sort of really struggling to really thriving. And that's how we might often, we might say, on this continuum, where are you? How are you going on things? And so what we've been doing in our work is we've been shifting this a bit. And so instead of thinking about this in terms of one dimension, we've been thinking about it in terms of two dimensions. And so this comes from Professor Corey Keyes. So he talks about a dual continuum of mental health. And what he does in his model is he breaks out mental health on one dimension and mental illness on another. And what this does by breaking it into the two dimensions is instead of, in order to thrive, you actually can't have mental illness. And that's what we think about with that single continuum. With this dual continuum, you can actually have high mental well-being despite mental illness. You can also not have mental illness, but also not be thriving in life. And so it's a different way of thinking about it. Now, as we've applied this to the workplace, we've changed the dimensions. So instead of mental health, mental illness, we've talked about this in terms of how much struggle you're experiencing, so how much challenge and struggle is going on, and versus thriving. So how are you feeling and how are you functioning? And so from this, we can think about at any point in time, how are you feeling and functioning? Are you low and you're kind of really not feeling well or not functioning well? Or are you feeling and functioning well? And then on the other dimension, we can think about how much struggle and challenge are you going through? And this again can change day to day or at different periods of time. And so from this, we can kind of think about, well, where are you? We can have those that have low amounts of struggle and they're really thriving. And so there are consistently thriving people. There are those that actually have a lot of struggle that are going on, and yet they're living well despite that. There are others, they don't have any struggles going on, but they're just sort of, they're not thriving either. And then there are those that are really struggling. And so over the past couple years, we've been identifying where different workers are in terms of these 4 different places that you might be. And so we began asking Australian workers, how are you? Where are you in these different boxes? In 2018, and we repeated this at the end of 2019. And then we asked everyone again in March, just when the coronavirus was starting to unfold here in Australia. And then we asked workers again how they were going at the beginning of August. So as here in Victoria, we were going into severe restriction. In other parts of Australia, things were actually really starting to open up. And so this is workers across Australia. And we see some interesting patterns here. So number one is our consistently thrivers, that one really went down over time, as we'd expect. So back in 2018, about almost 20% of workers were saying they were consistently thriving. By August 2020, we're down to about 7.4%. So people aren't in that consistently thriving. But interestingly enough, is this doing well despite struggle has actually increased over time, or kind of stayed fairly stable. So we have about 40% of people who are reporting, yeah, things are tough. There's struggle there, but I'm doing well despite that. And across a whole bunch of different dimensions, we actually see that those who are living well despite struggle are actually doing well in a lot of other areas. So they tend to perform well in their organization. They tend to report higher well-being in some of these different areas and whatnot. And this across various scales that we might look at. And so this has been something that we started looking at back at 2018, but we've seen the same pattern over time. And it's really brought forth to us that, we can actually thrive despite struggle that's there. And I think so often the message is sort of like, okay, we have to get rid of all the bad stuff and then we'll be all right. But it's actually, how can we actually thrive in those struggles and go well with things? I like this quote by Professor Barbara Fredrickson. It's not the absence of negative emotion. It's how you deal with them that matters. There are some that are doing this very, very effectively. There are others that, they maybe are not struggling as much, but they're just simply getting by and not really thriving. And then, of course, we do have some people who are really struggling and could really benefit from additional forms of support. So this is this idea that you can thrive despite struggle actually, becomes quite interesting in terms of, well, how can we then, as we continue to navigate these times, how can we get more people to actually be living well despite that struggle? We don't want people in the really struggling part. Obviously, that's something where we want to be giving support there. But we actually see a lot of people are in this not feeling bad, just getting by. And it's just sort of getting by in life, but that's also creating greater risk to end up in that really struggling category. So instead, how can we push more people up here? And so what we've really discovered through our work is there are different things that we can be doing that help get people more in this living well despite struggle. So things that actually can support us despite the challenges that are there. And so we've been talking about this in our work as what we're calling wellbeing amplifiers. So wellbeing amplifiers is what we can be doing to amplify or build up our well-being. So amplifiers, or AMP, is for 3 different elements. The first one of those is our ability to thrive. So the A there is, what ability do you actually have to go well? So I like to think about this as, do you actually have skills to actually take care of your well-being? What are little things that you can be doing in your everyday life? I kind of like to think about this as sort of positive habits or tools that I can be drawing on in order to actually be managing my own mental health and well-being well, or supporting others in that. So I need to actually have skills that help me to actually, manage my emotions, or do things that actually are good for my body or good for my mind in different ways. And in a little bit, I'll point to some of those that we can draw on. So we need to have the ability to actually thrive, as well as opportunities to actually put those abilities to work. The M is for motivation. And so, you know, are we actually motivated to take care of our well-being, or do we lack that motivation? And so it's just sort of, you know, doesn't matter, I'm just going to get through the day. To actually maintain our well-being, it takes ongoing effort and care. And so are we actually motivated to put in the effort to actually manage things well? The P is for psychological safety, and we're increasingly seeing that people who feel safe in their workplaces, safe in their homes, safe in different environments, are much more likely to feel and function well than those who are feeling less safe. And so feeling psychologically safe, it's where we can acknowledge that when we're struggling in the work that we're doing, we can actually make mistakes or ask questions, and we're not afraid of being judged or punishment or embarrassment. Unfortunately, we see that less than 20% of workers actually feel safe to share their struggles in the workplace. And so a lot of people feel like, well, I just have to put on the front that I'm doing all right, whether or not I actually am. And yet we actually see in workplaces where people are allowed to admit to struggle that they're actually much more supported, and they're much more likely to then be functioning well. So we have these amplifiers. And so question is, how can you amplify thriving? So how can you amplify thriving? And so this is the participation element. And so it says here, add your ideas to the wall. And so in the chat, a website will come up. And what I invite you to do is, this is, I'll just share my screen here so you can see what this is. So this is a Padlet board, and that some of you might have used this before. And it's just a board that allows us to share our own ideas. And so as we go through this next part, and I'll give you some ideas from our research in terms of ways we can amplify our well-being, but what ideas do you have? Now, how this works is if you just click on the board, you'll be able to start typing in the ideas that you actually have. You can also give a little heart or comment on others as you do that. So as we go through this, feel free to add those ideas to the wall, because then we can be learning and growing from one another. So as you add some of those ideas together, I'll give you a few things that we've discovered in our research, research by us and many others working in the field of positive psychology, of things that perhaps we can draw upon to help support our well-being, even in those times of challenge. And I think in those times of challenge and struggle, that actually becomes even more important that we do things to take care of our well-being and be proactive about that. So what are some of these things that we can do? I think one of the first things that we need to be recognizing is thinking about what is actually within our control and what is outside of our control. And we see that those who actually thrive despite struggle are much better at really focusing on the things that really are within their control and letting go of the things that are beyond their control. And at this point in time, there's a lot that's outside of our control. And yet those are the things that we worry about. And we don't do enough thinking about, well, what are the things within my control? And what is most within our control is actually our thoughts, our emotions, and behaviors. And a lot of the ways that we can actually help support our well-being are the small things that we can be doing in our everyday life that actually bring about more positive ways of thinking, help me to manage my emotions so that I'm not feeling in a negative place all the time, but perhaps at least experiencing some positive emotion, and behaviors that we engage in that are supportive of feeling and functioning well. So let me give you a few ideas. One I like to think of is what we call jolts of joy. What are your little jolts of joy? So these are little things that are sort of a pick-me-up. You know, when you perhaps you have, you know, for those who you're teaching and you have a hard period, what's a little go-to that you can pick up, and it just sort of gives you a little boost of positive emotion. And I think we have so much negative information and experiences coming in on us all the time that it can actually be really easy to start to feel very negative. So adding in those little jolts of joy when we're feeling down, I put the cup of coffee because I love, a good cuppa. It just sort of picks me up. Going for a little walk or getting out or whatever. If we can actually be incorporating these throughout our day, then it helps take us from some of those negative ways of thinking and feeling and can help us feel a bit more positive along the way. Now, this isn't about just feeling happy all the time, but it's adding in a bit of that positivity to counter a lot of that negativity that we're often feeling and functioning. Now, one warning on this is, do things within reason. If your jolts of joy is eating a piece of chocolate and you're doing that like 30 times a day, that might be one to kind of tail off on things. So, with reason, we want to do things. Kind of one thing that we see that can really benefit some of our emotions is just the power of gratitude. Gratitude is noticing and appreciating the good things that happen or the good things that are around us. And I think it's so easy to take things for granted. And yet we do see that purposely looking for the good things that are there are ways that can help us go from a place of feeling bitter or down to actually recognize how much we actually have around us. I know I've experienced this as we've been going through this time and just having springtime unfolding and really taking time to be grateful for, the smells of the flowers, the birds flying around, just takes me from that state of really feeling in some of those more negative ways. We do see that things like meditation and mindful practices can be a way of helping to calm down our emotions, our ways of thinking, especially if our minds start really running a lot, you're worrying about things. Different things like even just taking some deep breaths, focusing your attention in sort of calming ways can be helpful. And there are a lot of resources online that can help with all of this. Physical activity. We do see that staying physically active, it's important for our physical health. It's also really, really important for our mental health. And we do see that people are much less likely to experience things like depression and anxiety by staying active. And there's a reason why, we do have a couple hours, if you're in a restricted place like Melbourne, to get out, because it does actually help us support our mental health. A big one is thinking about taking breaks from technology. It's challenging because so much of our lives are now mediated by technology. And yet we do see that that's also very draining. So even the fact that we have to have so much that we're doing through technology, all of our, all these Zoom calls and things like that, it provides a way to connect, but it adds a whole cognitive load that we don't have when we're meeting in person. And so really having time that we're not looking at emails, we're not engaging in the medium, we're getting out and doing things that are more physical, are kind of physical in nature, perhaps reading a book or doing a puzzle or talking with someone, just gets us out of sort of the strain that technology places on us. So it's something that it's a tool that has enabled so much, but we also need breaks from it as well. Through all of this, prioritizing relationships is key. I think that's one thing that we've seen more than anything through the period of severe restriction is how important relationships really are. We are social creatures. We're meant to really be connecting with one another. And I think one thing we're really discovering is you can do a lot of that through electronic means, and yet there's also really something about face-to-face. So that physically being around others, which becomes important. So we really do need to, as we're connecting electronically, really be valuing the person in that more than the task. Try to find ways that we can be connecting with others face-to-face, of course, with social distancing and masks and all of that. But in ways that we're supporting each other. Very related to that is the power of compassion and kindness to both ourselves and others. So compassion it's recognizing suffering, our common humanity, wanting to alleviate that. And we can often think about, okay, we should be kind and compassionate to others, but we also need to be kind and compassionate to yourself. perhaps you're having a really hard day, you know, and it's like, why am I not accomplishing things? I should be doing more. Let go of the shoulds. Is that we're under a lot of load, and actually some of the best things we need to do at times is step back, care for ourselves, and take care of yourself, because only by then are you actually going to be able to care well for others. And so by being kind to ourselves, it actually allows us to be kinder to others, prioritize those relationships, and be able to kind of function well. Within this, very closely related, is we do need to take time. You know, I encourage you to take time for yourself, especially for those who are, you know, you're working with people, you're in caring modes or whatever. It's very easy for things to become about everyone else. And yet, if we don't take time for ourselves, over time, our resources are depleted. It undermines our motivation and our ability to actually care well. And so it becomes important to say, you know, this is me time. I really need to prioritize that and to be able to function well overall. And so we have to take the responsibility to say, you know, this is what I need and this is what I'm going to do, because I'm actually going to feel and function well in the long term much better by taking that time. And then finally, seek support when you need it. Is that we are all in this together, and there are times that we're doing really well, other times others are doing well, but we actually need to be able to reach out for support and help each other through these times, and that it's through one another that we're best able to really manage ourselves well and really thrive through things. And so we thrive together. So these are a few ideas. We do see this coming out of the pause psych research in terms of some of those skills and abilities that can help us feel and function well. One way I like to think about this is a lot of the ways that support our mental health and well-being, it's really about almost those positive habits that we engage in our everyday life. Really by doing that consistently, in the same way that I might consistently, you know, stay active or eat a healthy diet or get some good sleep to be able to maintain my physical fitness and my physical health. In the same way, we need to be incorporating little things into our everyday life to maintain our mental fitness. And what we see is during these times of struggle and challenge, it becomes more important than ever. Those that thrive despite challenge are the ones that are incorporating these things into their everyday life. Those who really start to just struggle more, these things start falling off. So I encourage you to be thinking about what are ways to amplify your well-being? How can we be giving this and supporting others within that? And what is our role within all of that? So thank you for letting me share some of this. And now would love to hear different questions you have, different reflections, your own ideas in terms of how we can thrive despite struggle, and how we can go well through both sort of the highs and lows that life brings us, both now, but then in the future as well.
I've got a question, if I can. It's a question rather than a sort of answer to that, or sort of bringing those ideas. I think that I'm finding the current time quite difficult, in that we're on the cusp of potentially more freedom, but there's also that almost feeling that you've got to have some optimism, but also like it may not actually work out, and we, you know, it kind of, what we're hoping for might not eventuate, could be sort of snatched away again, and how to balance those two. So the sort of the optimism with the caution, if you like.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and you've kind of like really captured something, is that in many ways we need something to be looking forward to, you know, and we're kind of like on this cusp of like things might change, that'll be good, and yet we also know it can be extended out again, it can be snatched away from us, and so some of that is sort of like, okay, that's beyond our control, and so two elements of that is, number one, it's again, kind of trying to stay in the now of what can we really focus on and do now to kind of keep ourselves going. Some of it can be thinking about, well, what can I look forward to and let go of when that might happen? And so a way I like to think about this is, if we think about sort of seasons, you have the winter time. And I know I had this when I was living in Philadelphia. So they have real seasons where you have snow and cold and gray, and then spring comes. Well, spring comes on a certain day on the calendar. And usually like that day on the calendar, it would then turn into like snowstorms after that. But spring eventually came. And so it was sort of like, it's going to come sometime, but you don't know when it's going to come. And so it's holding on to that, okay, something will happen sometime. So some of it is just sort of spanning out that kind of time perspective of, I don't know when things are going to happen, but I'm going to look forward to it when it actually does. And almost, in some ways, almost treasure it even more if it actually does. I think it can also be helpful to kind of stay realistic in it as well. And that if we're not feeling optimistic, that's actually okay. That's some of that self-compassion coming in. I know I've had this with different conversations with people who are living elsewhere, that are like, you must be so excited that restrictions are going to ease and everything. It's like, well, I just don't have the space to actually be looking forward to that until it actually happens, because I don't totally know that it's going to happen. Well, it will, but me trying to hold on to that actually undermines me and kind of gives a sense of like, well, I don't have that. And so that's that self-compassion of saying, actually, I'm not going to focus on that right now, because it is that uncertainty that just kind of makes us feel bad now. I don't know if that made any sense.
No, that's good. Yeah. Yep. Balancing the two.
It is. And I think that's sort of, some of the more just kind of, we are in a hard time right now, but it's not going to be that way forever. And we just do have to kind of keep reminding each other of that, and that over time things will change. They're always going to keep changing, and we're going to have hard times again, and we're going to have better times again. And so how can I kind of get through it and do the best I can within the challenge that's there?
Peggy, a quick question. I really love the research into workforces that you're looking at, and the amplifying wellbeing that's come from that. What about young people, and also I work in education, so also teacher wellbeing? Is there anything that you've come across with either of those?
Yeah, so very much, and I think a lot of these lessons, some of this research has been done in workplaces, which are very different pressures and whatnot than schools, but a lot of these ideas and whatnot are incredibly relevant to our teachers. I think one of the biggest ones is we need to actually be focusing directly on teacher well-being. We go right to thinking about we need to be supporting the students, which is important, but if our teachers are burned out and exhausted, and I mean, this is what we're seeing, is so many of our teachers are really struggling. And that's just, we see the schools that are really saying at the first, we really need to really focus on our teachers and empower them, give them the abilities and the support. We're really going to say well-being is actually critical, because if we don't have a healthy workforce, it undermines our students, it undermines everything that happens in our schools. So the schools that are actually, and unfortunately a lot of this, it is affected by leadership. And so the leaders that actually become, the school leaders, the principals and whatnot, that actually say, we actually want to put well-being at the heart of this, that's where you see a lot of this actually functioning well. Too often we have schools that they have too many priorities that are going on. It's all about the students and whatnot. The teachers are the last thought. And, we're seeing it. Our teachers are burning out. There's so many pressures that are there. There's pressures from parents, from the government, from society and whatnot, that we're really kind of setting up a lot of problems. And so we are doing some different work in schools and whatnot. There's no quick fixes, and there's something that we have to really be working. Some of my work is around, okay, let's actually give teachers skills just to even support their own well-being, starting there, while at the same time we're working to say, how can we change some of the systemic pressures and the ways the schools are set up, so that it's actually not all about academics. Academics are important, but that's not everything. we actually need to be thinking about the well-being of each individual within our schools if we're actually going to have, if we're actually really going to create the educational communities that we really want to see.
Thanks, Peggy. This is really interesting from, I guess, from a personal point of view as well. I just wanted to quickly say as well, thanks to everyone who has made a comment on that Padlet, how to sort of amplify thriving. We've got some really great comments, and I guess it's a really good opportunity as well to kind of pick up different ideas from other people, and I'm definitely going to cuddle a dog as often as possible, and yeah, really focus on healthy eating and diets. There's some really great comments there, so thank you, and hopefully everyone can pick up something really positive from that as well. Yeah. So we've got a few minutes left. Does anyone else have any questions at all? Chloe, thank you for your comment in the chat function. A really great quote. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. I think that's really, really incredible and very relevant in these times. So I think that's really positive. Thank you.
And I think coming out of that, I think these times really do make us actually stop and actually say, well, who am I? What do I really care about? How do I actually want to function? And I think our challenge as a society is to rush too quickly to kind of restore what was normal. We know that there's been a lot of things that have not been working in our schools, in our workplaces, in our societies more generally. And this does give us a chance to sort of stop, slow down on life and say, well, what really matters to us as individuals, as groups, as schools, as societies. And so it becomes an opportunity for us to actually say, what changes do we want to make? And, in our schools, perhaps this is a time we can actually have those conversations of saying, we know things are not working in our schools. Could we be doing things in a different way? What are our core values, and going back to that? I think the challenge we have is that rush to get back to the normal of saying, no, we need to recreate things and get back, even though that was not actually serving us well. And so I think it does give us an opportunity that my hope is that we take advantage of that and we don't go too quickly to try to restore things that were perhaps not functioning for us well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you, Peggy. I just wanted to quickly sort of ask and sort of put it out there to everyone. If there was sort of one thing that you wished everyone sort of thought about when it comes to sort of the workplace and bringing out the best in others at work right now. Yeah, is there one thing that you wish everyone thought about when it comes to bringing out the best in others? Does anyone have any sort of thoughts or suggestions about that? How can we do that in a workplace?
Maybe this is a comment that's not specific to the current situation, but just in general, I think it's just realizing that people have not just different skills and abilities, but they have different ways in how they go about providing that. Like, for example, one thing I've found about myself throughout this period is that if I want to be producing more creative work, I seem to do better in like properly middle of the night. But if I want to have a more productive day in sense of just like ticking off things that don't require much, out there thinking, I do much better doing the opposite, like waking up really early and then getting through things. And I think this kind of counts more for general structure of work, is not trying to be like, oh, everybody needs to work 9 to 5. This is what we're going to do. It works for everybody. It's more, you want to take the best out of people. So as long as the work gets done, as long as people are thriving in that sense, doesn't really matter how they come out about it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think sorry, Sarah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I totally agree with that too.
Thank you. It was a great comment, and I definitely think the times of working at home have enabled people to really find their way of working in this state of play, and we're able to, yeah, have that conversation with management about, this is when I work best, this is how I work best, I'll still get the work done. Yeah, well done. Sorry, Sarah, did you have a comment or question?
I was just going to say, just based on those comments, the idea that we talked about kindness and compassion towards ourselves and others. I think there's also generosity goes with that. You know, we're generous in terms of what we expect and from others and ourselves. And I think if you do that well, then it supports and assists in the thriving and in the doing well at work. So the compassion and the kindness, but the generosity of kind of spirit and thinking towards others and yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely agree with you there, Sarah. That's wonderful. Do we have any sort of last minute questions? We've got a couple of minutes left. Otherwise, we might wrap it up. I hope everyone's had a really good experience with this session, and you have taken a few things away. I know I have. Peggy, thank you so much for coming on board and sharing this. As I said, the session will be recorded and it'll be on our YouTube channel, so feel free to rewatch it, to also share with colleagues, family and friends. I think this particular topic from Peggy is very relevant to pretty much anyone who's dealing with life every day at the moment. So thank you so much, Peggy, much appreciated, and thank you everyone for joining. If you have any other sort of feedback or comments, you can email me at mgsc-experience@communitymelb.edu.au. I'll pop it in the chat.